Hello, welcome back to Sroki and the King, our fourth official episode. 2 weeks of the NBA season are now in the books, and there is plenty, as always, to discuss. I am joined once again by my fantastic co-host, Mr. Adam King. How are you doing, Adam? How's it over in Australia?
It's nice this morning. The weather's starting to warm up a little bit here, which is nice. Got an early morning NBA game going on,
Yeah,
which I always enjoy. And I was going to come on and ask you if you're a Braves fan, but I don't need to. Looking at that
yeah. There,
shirt,
there we
so
go, right here.
yeah,
Yeah,
big night in
that
Atlanta tonight, perhaps.
it could be. Yes, the Braves are one win away from their first World Series, and almost on the better over 25 years. Basically, my entire life I've been waiting for a chance to witness an Atlanta sports championship in person. So I'm going to be in that vicinity later tonight. Very excited about that. Go Braves! But that is not, the hoopball baseball podcast is really yet to get off the ground. So until we get to that point, we can save that conversation for then. This is, of course, a hoopball presentation. This is Sroki and the King, a fantasy basketball podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find podcasts. And of course, you can find us live on YouTube every Sunday. If you want to participate with the show, drop questions in the chat for Adam and I to answer at the end, as we do every week. Please do. It is the best way to view this, I would assume, because not only do you get to have your questions answered, but you get to look at Adam and I's beautiful faces, and that's just something that you can't quite capture in the podcast format. So, Adam, it's been a relative. The NBA is now in full speed. Most teams have played about 5, 6, 7 games. So, we've gone from the week one period of overreacting to every single thing that happens, where now we start to see some trends that could tell some stories for where we're going, where certain teams are going with this NBA season. There's a lot of different things to break into today. We're going to be focusing on trends primarily, both with the specific players, but teams themselves as well. And we start with our first story of the week, which talks a little bit about some interesting trends to start the season. The top of the Eastern Conference. Tell me if you had these top 4 teams 2 weeks into the year. The Knicks, Wizards, Bulls, and Miami Heat are all tied 5-1 at the top of the Eastern Conference. The Heat, probably not as big a surprise as perhaps these other 3 teams. Adam, what are your first impressions for the top class of the Eastern Conference? Which of these teams do you feel like, from what we've seen this year, seem to be making a case to be exceeding expectations in the long run?
Look, I think for me, it's probably which team isn't or doesn't fit that, and it's only the Wizards. Like I could see the Knicks, Bulls, and Heat all potentially getting into the top 4. I think it's pretty clear already that the Bucks are okay to rest guys and take it easy as long as they sort of finish somewhere in the playoff picture. It doesn't really matter. So they're not going to be pushing super hard. And I actually think Atlanta might adopt that philosophy a little bit as well, probably not to the same degree, but I don't know how concerned they are about getting that top seed either. So, yeah, I'm just sort of looking down the standings there now. They're probably the 2 in the Nets. Well, the Nets fit that as well.
The Nets, they have a whole slew of things going on.
Yeah,
we all know that rest and getting ready, just getting to the playoffs is really just the priority, as much as the seeding.
Yeah. So look, I guess they're the 3 teams that are probably sort of stand out as the ones that should be in that top 4 or could be.
Yeah.
But outside of them, we've got the Hornets at 5th as well. They've looked really good.
I've been a big fan of what they've done.
Yeah. So no, look, I think if I had to pick one, it would probably be the Knicks, only because they did it last year. So I think they are a little more sort of, they've got the recent history, although the Heat were there 2 years ago, and they look better this year as well. The Bulls, I would like it to be the Bulls because I really like what they've done. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you have a standout there that you think?
I've just been really impressed with how the Bulls have just connected offensively, and they've looked better than advertised defensively as well. I think that this team has more balance to them than we gave them credit for. Where a lot of people kind of went in on their philosophy in the offseason, where people were just like, they spent millions upon millions to field what will most likely be an average team. And, in my mind, I like it when teams go out and try and mix things up. Like I think that the DeMar DeRozan signing, maybe they spent a little too much on him, but he's been great for their offense this year. I mean, he's fit in very well next to Zach LaVine. He, those three of him, Zach, DeRozan, and Vucevic have already imposed their will quite a bit. Alex Caruso has been fantastic for them off the bench, both in real life and in fantasy too. They did lose Patrick Williams this week for the season, which was pretty bad, pretty crazy to, just like that, he was out of there. And he's obviously a big part of what they're going to do long term. So I'll be fascinated to see if this Bulls team continues to succeed, record wise. What do they do to sort of eventually piece together that power forward spot? Because you can't just roll with Derrick Jones Jr. and Alize Johnson as your main options for that spot going forward. DeRozan could play some four and all, but I think that what they've done has been particularly. I think they've exceeded expectations for a lot of that a lot of people had so far, and I'm rooting for them to continue that going forward because I think it's a fun story, and I think it's good for the teams like them to work at being competitive rather than tank until you just accumulate enough assets to go big. Like that. Sometimes that works, but a lot of times you just that results in some pretty unwatchable products like we've seen in Oklahoma City.
Well, I think we're looking, like we were chatting off air just beforehand about the Kings, and I think Portland sort of fall into that bucket as well. It just seems like they're afraid to make big moves.
Yeah.
It feels like CJ McCollum should have been traded years ago.
Honestly, yeah.
Or Lillard, like mix things up.
Maybe make even a case for Nurkic too, just to kind of they're just of that contingent. Yeah, I agree. Like you want to see more movement. You want to see teams take bigger risks. Portland's had a rough start to the year. It looks like they're kind of treading water. Lillard has not been himself either, but
no, that's true. But yeah, just a number of teams that, as you said, they are just treading water. They make the playoffs, but they're not really a threat to win the championship. And yeah, I think that it's almost like they're bringing it back to Portland again. I think it's like they're trying to keep the fans happy by keeping CJ around. Like he's a fan favorite. We get that same with Lillard. You don't want to upset the fans, but you have to look at the long term, and fans who might be a bit disgruntled if you get rid of a player or make a move that they don't agree with, if it means success in 3 years, then they're going to come back around. So there's a few teams that fall into that bucket, I think.
Well, we'll see where things go from here. Very interesting start at the top of the Eastern Conference, not who you'd necessarily expect, but I think each of these four teams have a case to make, especially the teams like Boston, who are starting the year off 2-4 and have weird stories coming out about, Jaylen Brown and the head coach getting after it at practice. Teams like them, the East is no longer a cakewalk. Talent alone doesn't win out. I think what most impressed me about these four squads is that they're bigger than the sum of their parts. Especially the Knicks and Wizards so far. They've really relied on depth to exceed expectations. So it'll be really interesting to see where they go from here. The second story of the week has been part of a larger conversation as people were anticipating this big rule change that the NBA rolled out this offseason that really ultimately foul hunting, trying to curb that from players like James Harden, Trae Young, Steph Curry, who bait defenders into the air to take unnatural shots, just flinging the ball at the rim, forcing contact. We've seen, like stopping midway in the lane, having a guy jump over your back. There's been a lot of that from last year, a lot of complaints. Free throw rates are now down across the league this year. And in particular, players like Trae and like Harden have not been getting some of the whistles that they might have in the past. Now, I think that these guys are, come across foul calls in different ways. But just from your perspective, Adam, I mean, what do you make of the rule change is impact both in real life basketball and in fantasy as well to this point? Do you feel that it's been do you think it's a very noticeable effect that's going to last the rest of the year?
I like it from a fan perspective. I like it. It's sort of a bit of a throwback to what basketball was like when I was growing up, in that there's a little bit more physicality to it. They're letting
Mm-hmm.
players just go for it under the basket a little bit more. We're not seeing those leg kickouts and the people taking threes when it's clearly not their natural shooting motion. So all that sort of thing, I think, is really good. Is it sustainable? I hope so, but I have a feeling it will middle out a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it'll start swinging back slightly the other way because Harden and Trey and guys like that are being quite vocal about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like it, and I think, I mean, and an example is in rugby league over here, a sport that's really big over here. There was a huge crackdown on attacking the head. So when you get tackled in a game,
Yeah.
and it's because of concussions and all that sort of stuff. So similar to NFL over there, in that there's a big drive on protecting the head, but we don't have helmets in rugby league over here. So there was a period where they brought in this new rule very quickly of anyone attacking the head, and you're basically sent off from the field. And suspensions would come and all that sort of stuff. And for about 3 weeks, it was really heavily enforced to the point where people were saying, this is ridiculous. It's taking a lot of the physicality out of the game. Within about a month, it started going back the other way, and sort of there was a middle ground, and then you'd get complaints from both sides that it's now they've eased up, and so I think a similar thing will happen. So the referees will adjust. But no, look, I think it's been good. And if I'm just looking at the top free throw shooters thus far, basically none of them are 3-point shooters now, or perimeter shooters. They're all bigs or guys that score at the basket. So
Right.
DeMar DeRozan is there, but we know he's not a 3-point shooter. He gets his fouls when he's attacking the basket. Same with Jimmy Butler. They're the two guards. Ja Morant is another one. Doesn't shoot a lot of threes, gets to the basket. So it's interesting just looking. It's only 2 weeks, but a lot of bigs getting to the free throw line, which is the way it used to be. That's how it used to be when I was playing growing up and watching the NBA. What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, I think you made a great point, like especially with the analogy to rugby league and just in general in sports, when you institute major like shifts in rules, particularly highly publicized ones like these, the referees want to send a message very early on. I mean, in the NBA, we saw this not even 6-7 years ago when they started really changing those rip through calls. They heavily enforced to start the season, sending a message, especially to the players who are considered to be the greatest defenders, if you will, that these types of things aren't going to fly this year. You need to change your game up a little bit. And look, I've watched a lot of Hawks games, as you might imagine. And, Trey, look, when Trey is up, first of all, Trey's scoring numbers are, honestly, they're fine. He's not like, his production is still there. It's not like, and I don't think that these rule changes have a direct correlation to production, because I think people have been calling James Harden's a disappointing fantasy start to the season. They've been connecting it to this change for the foul calls. It's part of it, but Harden's whole deal seems to be a lot of other factors like game shape and mindset and stuff like that. But I can tell that Trey, a lot of Trey's production comes at the rim, even though he's known as a 3-point scorer. He does do a lot to the floater game is very important. He does get to the rim a whole lot, and he's really getting nothing out there. It is and it's not just him. I mean, you can watch some of these games, and there are players who get mauled at the basket, and they won't get these foul calls. There has been an element of swallowing the whistle to maybe even a little bit of a detriment. But I think that is just more so we're in the early phases of this, where not only do players need to know the new rules, but referees need to get comfortable being able to differentiate what's baiting and what's an actual foul call. And I think we'll see this start to level off at a certain point. But like you said, I think that there is going to be, I think the rule change is positive. I think that the fouls are, once this all evens out and people get familiar and comfortable with these new rules, we're going to see fouls be a little similar to how they used to be called back in the day. We're going to see, I mean, we've already seen a lot of it's been great to see the elimination of just unnecessary fouls that make no sense, that aren't really in the flow of an actual game. And I wouldn't be too worried from a fantasy perspective about all this. I think it is positive for, like these guys who do attack the rim more often. I think that they get the benefit of the doubt, and they just have a larger value now that now that their free throw rate gets to stay the same, while guys who might have been ahead of them in years past are lowered down. Like you said, DeRozan and Butler, they have more value in that category this year than they did last year, just by virtue of other guys not competing with them in the rankings. So it's interesting stuff. I wouldn't panic over it from a fantasy perspective, but it's interesting.
No.
And look, Harden and Trey complaining publicly, of course.
Yeah. And look, I really hope that this, once it does settle down and the feedback is then generally positive and it's improving the game, making it a better product, I really hope they then do something about the end of game fouls, because the last 2 minutes of a game should not go for 20 minutes. And when they're fouling to avoid a team coming down and shooting a three-pointer, and they get 2 free throws, but then that team gets the ball back, I really hope they do something about that, because it almost makes it unwatchable.
Like instituting, like every team has a limit on how many intentional fouls they can give at the end of a game.
Yeah.
Like if you exceed that limit, it's treated like technical free throws where they get the ball back or something like that.
Yeah, they get the ball back. Yeah, I think maybe you get 1 or 2, and then any subsequent ones, then the other team also gets the ball back, because that would stop it instantly.
It would add a lot of layers of strategy to it too. Like when you institute these intentional fouls, like then emphasizing defensive possessions at the end of games, like it could. I feel like I think that's a rule change that they'll definitely get to at a certain point, because
I think they have to. Yeah,
pace of the game is a huge deal for NBA, really for all of sports right now. Everyone's trying to figure out how to cut back and make the product more watchable.
Yeah,
and I think that could be a cool way to even add to the spirit of the game as well from cutting things.
I mean, you look at like in the Olympics. I mean, this is going off topic a little bit, but in the Olympics with the 3-on-3 basketball, which I hadn't watched a lot of, to be honest, because it's not huge over here in Australia. I know it's really big in Europe. And so watching that in the Olympics, which I watched a lot of it, and there's basically, I mean, there are fouls, but it's almost call your own foul. There is a referee, but it's so quick. You foul, you just get the ball straight back. They let a lot more go under the basket, but there's no complaining, because as soon as the foul is called, the ball goes to the other team and you're off. There's no waiting. So I think like that shows that it can work. Obviously, it's not going to be to that level, because 3-on-3 is really rough and physical. But I think it sets the precedent and shows you that it can work, and the game can be sped up by taking some of these ticky-tacky fouls out of it and strategy fouls and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it will be interesting. I hope they do something about that.
Well, we'll definitely circle back on this topic a couple months from now, and maybe we can take a look at free throw rates to date versus what it'll be like then, who's at the top of the charts around that time, and really how impactful these rules ultimately will be. But it certainly generated a lot of conversation this week from both the players and fans. But it is, and we can even see it in the comments on the video right now, like it's a generally received thing, a generally positive received thing in the league. And you know what? I want to see more of it. So that's it for stories. Adam and I, we're going to jump to our next topic, which is really just breaking down trends that we've seen so far and what's real and what's not. If you have questions about your own teams or comments about, some of the players that Adam and I are about to break down, let us know in the chat. We will probably talk about that once we get to the Q&A section at the end of the show. But Adam, we have had a lot of questions recently about all 10 of these players that we're probably going to touch on today. We're going to start at the very top. This guy has blown away expectations about as much as any player, and he could be the fantasy basketball steal of the season. Talk about Miles Bridges, current number 8 player in 9 category leagues. He has career highs across the board: 25.5 points per game, 2.5 threes, 8 rebounds, almost 2 steals per game, which is nuts. And then just really efficient, really high efficiency from the field and the line. You can see here in particular, 50% from the floor on nearly 19 shots per game. Adam, is this sustainable?
I hope it is,
Yeah.
because I've got him everywhere. Look, no, I think my answer would be no. This is not sustainable. I don't think he's a first round player. As thrilled as I would be,
Yeah.
looking at his numbers there, I think the scoring comes down a fraction. Rosie has got to come back in, so he's going to take some shots.
We need to that's definitely a thing to touch on here.
Yeah, so I think that comes down a little bit. I think the threes are potentially real. He looks like a much improved 3-point shooter. He's getting plenty of attempts up. Rebounds, possibly not. I mean, 8 maybe. I was sort of thinking more around 6.5, 7. The steals, maybe not. Maybe slightly down. I don't know, 1.4, 1.5. I think the percentages are somewhat
They've always been pretty high.
Yeah. Yep. I think they're there. He's blocking, 0.7 shots. I think that's realistic. I mean, he's so athletic that he's going to fall into almost a block a game. So, no, look, I don't think that's sustainable, but I could see him ending as a top 30 player quite comfortably.
And that's still a gigantic draft day steal. I mean, Miles Bridges was going near the top 100 picks, and that was mostly because people were unsure of where he fits on this team. You know, we saw him explode at the end of last year. That came without Gordon Hayward, to be fair. You know, he was going to be split competing for power forward minutes with PJ Washington, who for the most part last season was prioritized, at least in the rotation, over Bridges, you know? So there was always this kind of confusion as to where his role would end up panning out. The things that the elements that are definitely unsustainable, I think the most is definitely the shots per game right now. Like Terry Rozier led the Charlotte Hornets in shot attempts per game last season, and he's played in none of these games effectively. And he does come back today, most likely, today being Sunday, the 31st. Happy Halloween, by the way. Scary Terry is coming back. But, you know, once he's in there, you know, Rozier is going to get his shots. They need his ability to make plays off the dribble, both as a facilitator and as a slasher, as a 3-point shooter. Like his role is that he's not really replicable what he can do. And it'll be interesting to see if Bridges still maintains that like 1B role in the offense when all of these guys are healthy, because we've seen him explode now when one of Rozier or Hayward are out. We've really yet to see him do this when both of those guys are in. And that's going to be pretty key in my perspective on whether or not he can maintain the usage. But the percentages are real. I do think that. I mean, he has always had a good touch from the free throw line, and he's always been pretty effective from the field. The rebounds could be, the steals are probably too high, but I could see somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 2.3 combined defensive stats per game, you know, once things start leveling off. I don't think that's crazy. I agree that I think that we're looking at a top 40 season for Miles Bridges. From what I've watched, his production does look real to me. He looks like he has taken a step up, and clearly, like, there is a chemistry element with LaMelo Ball too. I think that he makes a lot of sense as LaMelo's running mate in that front court.
That was sort of why I leaned into him a little bit. So his ADP was in the 90s. I was more than comfortable taking him in the 70s. And part of that was just that chemistry he has with LaMelo Ball on the court, which came through at the end of last year. And just something to note as well, I mean, you talk about Rozier coming back and taking shots. They've had Oubre in that starting lineup, and he's not afraid to shoot the ball either.
True.
So Rozier comes in and takes Oubre's shots from the opening 5. And Oubre's, I just looked it up there, he's attempting 13 shots a game.
Okay.
So Rozier could theoretically take more than that, but
he averaged 16 and a half last year, for reference.
Yeah. But that might come down, I think, just with the way the Hornets are built now. And I think they're more comfortable going to Bridges as an offensive option. And LaMelo Ball is just going to get more confident on the offensive end as well. So, yeah, no, like you said, top 40, top 30, I think is well within reach for him.
Yeah, it definitely. So all that to say, he's probably in a slightly sell high window. I don't know if I would really. But Bridges is just one of these guys right now because he's playing with house money, kind of untapped potential. it would take a it would take a pretty convincing offer for me to trade him off. I feel like he's just one of these players that I really want to ride the wave of and see where he ultimately pans out. But I think you and I have the conservative approach here, which is even the conservative estimate of assuming that he's in for a top 40 or 30 season is a giant draft day win. But I do think that's realistic. So I'd say keep riding the Miles Bridges train while he's still steaming on ahead. Let's transition now to a guy who is underperforming expectations, and perhaps more so than any other player because of all the hype that he came into this draft season with. And that's Michael Porter Jr., currently outside the top 150 in 9 category leagues with averages of 10.8 points per game, less than 2 threes, 6 rebounds, and 33% shooting from the field on 13 attempts per game. Adam, what do you make of the slow start for Michael Porter Jr. so far? And what about parts of it are real or unreal to you?
Yeah, he's another guy that I've got in multiple teams as well. So, I mean, it's balancing out at the moment because Bridges is doing what I thought Porter would do.
Right.
So it hasn't sort of been to my detriment just yet, but it is pretty frustrating. And I mean, Malone went on record saying we need to get Porter involved more. He needs to be getting his shots, that sort of thing. But when you watch them play, they don't seem to run much for him. Like, he doesn't seem to be a focal point. He just plants himself on the 3-point line. I don't know. He's still an odd fit for me in that offense, as talented as he is. And I think the fact that Jamal Murray's not there is actually hurting Porter as well, because teams are just able to lock down Porter. Like, they know that he's going to be option 1 or 2. Him and Jokic are the two sort of go-to guys there. And Jokic is a lot harder to stop, let's be honest, because he can do anything. Like, he can score from anywhere. He can shoot these ridiculous floaters. Porter's a little bit more predictable at the moment, in that he doesn't really score off the dribble too much. So I think not having Murray there has actually hurt him. But look, I mean, in saying that, his numbers, outside of his percentages, his numbers are okay. 6 rebounds, I mean, you'd hope that they'd maybe go up a little bit. But 1.3 steals, that's nice. I think if he can get over a steal. Closer to 1 block would be nice. He's on 0.2, so I think we'd like that to come up, obviously. But if you bump up his percentages to what we were expecting, which is 50-ish%, then straight away his points go up to 18, 19 a game. And I think he's a very confidence-based player. So if his shots start falling, he'll start looking for his shot a bit more. And so I think that's all it is, really. It's just his confidence and his inability to score at the moment. Everything else is okay. And he is still, he's 150th ranked player-ish.
Still productive enough.
Obviously it has been really disappointing, and we're waiting for that to turn around. But I'm still reasonably confident, but I'm not sure he hits the heights that we hoped in the preseason. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you make a really solid point about how there is a little bit of a detrimental effect to Murray not being there. That I think, a lot of people, including myself, when we were projecting this big season for Porter, may have overlooked just a bit that the calculus changes out there when there is not a third dynamic offensive threat. It's really easier to key in on Porter Jr., who does rely a little bit more on spot up opportunities. That being said, he has one of the most unguardable jump shots in the NBA. With his height and release point, it is on par with the likes of, some of these other fans. There's a shooting 54% the way that Porter did last year while averaging like 3 threes a game. There's really only a handful of players that can do that. And I do think that once he figures out where to get his spots on the floor, and once his shots do start falling, that confidence thing that you mentioned will come into play here. The unsustainable thing, obviously, is the 33% from the field. That's just a really easy thing to just project for it. Just regression to the mean. Porter Jr. is going to climb back up at some point this season, especially with how efficient he's been in the past. he's probably not going to hit 54% like we saw last year, and it might not even be at 50% itself. But even if you're at 49, 48, the threes are going to go way up. The points are going to go way up. The blocks I do anticipate to go up a good amount too, just because he averaged about 1 per game last year. It was actually a source of value for him relatively. The steals are really nice this year. That might be unsustainable themselves just from what we've seen. But there's just a whole lot of things when I look at the stat lines for Porter that just they're easy to project where the changes are going to come into play here. Like there are certain players that might be a little shakier who have started off poorly that it might be a little shakier that they can get back to the heights that we anticipated. I don't really share that feeling with Porter. I think that he's one of the better buy low candidates in fantasy basketball right now. In particular, and also, 13 shots per game is also interesting. That's about as many as he took last season. I feel like that's going to go up at some point, but especially once his confidence starts coming too. Like if he's still getting fed 13 shots a night on this low efficiency, the shots start going in, you can see that confidence play out on the court. They're probably going to look to get involved more often. So I think there's a lot of elements here that we can anticipate that are pretty easy to project a jump back up to his at least
and
average
I think
levels.
Something else for him, which just quickly, and we'll move on, but you talk about these other players who are struggling and not hitting their shots. I think Damian Lillard is a really good example of that as a player who's struggled. For me, though, Porter, he visibly looks like he has a lack of confidence. Like you watch him on the floor and he's sort of shoulders slumped, head down. Whereas someone like Lillard, who has a lot more confidence in his ability to turn things around, you can watch him play and you wouldn't know if he's gone 1 of 10 or 9 of 10. He looks the same player. And he'll try to do other things to get himself going, or he'll get his teammates involved. For Porter, he doesn't have that he doesn't have the ball in his hands enough to be able to involve his teammates. And there have been a couple of games where he's tried to pick things up on the defensive end to try and get himself going and get himself motivated. And it's worked to a degree, but then as soon as his shot starts not dropping, he just reverts back and he looks like he's out there but not enjoying himself. And so I really think confidence, we have harped on it a little bit, but I think that is a really big part of his struggles at the moment.
And we've actually seen that from him in the past. He's always been one of those players that you can see it on its face when you watch these games. Like if he's out of it, he's out of it. You can see him out of the play. You can see the body language not being right. So he's always been that sort of way. And I think that's an interesting element too that you brought up, just about getting yourself going in different ways other than shooting. And if that translates to more defensive, effort from Porter Jr. and translates to more defensive stats, there's an element of positivity there for fantasy purposes. Let's move on to our next player, another guy exceeding a lot of expectations, at least from a fantasy perspective. There are plenty of fans plenty of fans of his in real life who would tell you that they always saw this coming. That's the superstar turn for Ja Morant. Number 10 in 9 category leagues right now, with averages of nearly 29 points per game, 2 3-pointers, 5.2 rebounds, 7.7 assists, 1.8 steals as well, with really high efficiency of 52% from the floor, 84% from the free throw line, as well as 5 turnovers per game. Now, this is sort of, in my mind, a little bit of the stuff is that we see with Morant right now is sort of the inverse of what we just talked about with Porter, in terms of like, we are going to anticipate a regression to the mean at some point with percentages. Morant has never been like, what he's doing from the field and the line is ridiculous. And I'm not going to say that there's not a realistic chance that he's improved for good in one of those two areas. In particular, the free throw stroke has looked really well this season. But historically speaking, he is yet to really, these highs that he has hit are really have proven to be unsustainable to this point of his career. But that being said, he's obviously taken a leap. I think that this is going to be the first year that he finishes within the top 109 cat leagues. My question is to what degree? I don't think he's a first-round player. And in particular, the things that pop out to me here that I'm very interested to see whether or not they stick are these 3-point numbers and steals numbers. Both 2.3 threes per game and 1.8 steals per game are nearly twice what he averaged last season. How do you feel about some of these numbers for Morant, Adam? Is there do the percentages feel tenuous to you? Are those threes and steals numbers something that you want to key in on? What do you think's real and not in respect to his game?
Yeah, look, I think the threes might be real.
I do too.
They might come down slightly, 2.1 or something, but I just think that's a natural progression for a guard. If your name's not DeMar DeRozan, so
he's hit some threes this year. Yeah,
he has. Yeah. So I think that's probably real. I think he'll be at least at 2 threes per game. The steals, I think, come down. I don't think he can stick at 1.8. With the amount that he does on the offensive end, I just think he's going to run out of gas a little bit there. So I think that'll come down probably. It could come down as low as 1.2. I mean, this is still a reasonably small sample size, but 1.2, 1.3, and percentages, I think, both come down a little bit. But he does, I mean, as we touched on earlier with the free throws, he does a lot of his scoring at the basket. Yeah. So realistically, he could be up at 49%. Someone almost like a Kyrie Irving, who's quite efficient for a guard as well, Colin Sexton. So I think he'll still be a very efficient scorer. Free throws, like the three-pointers, I guess, it's something that he needs to work on and will theoretically improve every year. So he could very well be close to 80% from the free throw line. I don't think he'll be up at 84, but so I think everything pulls back a little bit, or well, not everything, but a few of those stats, and he probably ends as I think. Well, if you punt turnovers, I think he's probably a top 40, top 30 sort of player. I think turnovers are something that's going to happen, but most people in head-to-head don't pay attention to those anyway. So
nor should they really.
So I think he regresses a bit, but he'll definitely be a lot better than he was last year.
Yeah, I think really it's I totally agree on the threes, and that does sort of translate to the touch of the line too. Those are those areas that really that's a natural progression point for guards. And for Morant in particular, in today's game, I'm sure are areas that he knew he needed to really step his game up in. And I mean, the guy is a star in every sense of the word. He's going to be the focal point offensively for this Grizzlies team. There's a lot of interesting pieces on I love the way that they're constructed this season in particular. They look really good. But those look in an 8-cat league that hits his ADP. You know, if you anticipate that he finishes at a top 40 player, and that would be the first year that would happen. Those 5 turnovers definitely come into play in 9-cat though. Once things start again regressing a little bit in some of these certain areas, that will have that's a pretty large anchor in that setting. But I think the shooting touch has definitely taken a notable step up, and that at some point will come down percentage wise, but those are areas that I do think that he's turned a corner in. That's pretty important for his game going forward to become a sustainable category leagues player that you can rely on in a lot of settings. Let's talk about another guy a guard who's similarly off. Well, not similarly, complete opposite. Off to a really rough start, especially efficiency-wise. De'Aaron Fox is currently ranked outside the top 250 in 9 category leagues. 19.4 points per game, 4.4 rebounds, and 6.6 assists with 1.2 steals are all numbers that are relatively in the ballpark from what Fox has done in the past. But these percentages and turnovers have been just awful. 38% from the floor on nearly 19 shots per game, 61% from the line, which has always been an area that Fox has struggled in. He had a really nice stretch after the All-Star break last year where he was hitting his free throws. That is not the case this year. And then 4.2 turnovers per game as well. Those 3 categories in particular have really just, obliterated some of the fantasy value that he could have had with these numbers. So, to me, this seems pretty straightforward that some of these things are going to change. The field goal percentage in particular for Fox seems like an area that stands to come up quite a bit. But are you concerned at all by this start in the long run?
Well, I'm not concerned because I don't have him anywhere because he was just going too high for me.
Right.
Yeah, look, I think, this is basically the opposite of Ja Morant. I think his percentages both come up and come up substantially. Probably closer to 43% from the field, quite comfortably, 73 from the line.
Yeah.
Steals probably come up as well. That's sort of been a strength of his, or a moderate strength anyway. So I think they come up to 1.5. And with the percentages come the points as well. So points, I mean, if he starts hitting more shots, his points easily get up to 24, 25 per game. So
yeah, 19 at these percentages are honestly, in a way, kind of impressive. But only, maybe not on 19 shots per game, but
Yeah. So no, look, he'll be a lot better than this. It is a really nice time to buy low if you're that way inclined and you'd like to get him. He's not going to be like Jar. I don't think he's not going to be a top 40 player. I think he's more sort of, I don't know, top 80, top 70, something like that. But points and assists are valuable. We know that. And so he probably does get a little bit of a bump in terms of his appeal, because he offers upside in those categories, and they're often hard to find in fantasy leagues.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't think I have much more to add on that front, other than this is just sort of your classic case of, just a cold streak to start the year, really accentuating a player's flaws, but at the same time also pointing out where the value still remains. And I think that Fox will stabilize it at a certain point. Let's talk about another guy who's been really hot to start the season, and there's some interesting elements to how he's done it. Mo Bamba for the Orlando Magic is currently a top 50 player in 9 category leagues, averages of 13 points per game, nearly 2 3-pointers, 9 rebounds, in 1.9 blocks. And he's doing this in 32 minutes and sharing a lot of that time with Wendell Carter Jr. in that Orlando Magic front court. It's worked surprisingly well. Wendell Carter is, versatile enough defensively to be able to operate as that 4 effectively on that end of things. And then Bamba playing career highs in minutes. I mean, even last season, he didn't play, stretches like this. And the fantasy game has been just ridiculous. I mean, he's everything that, he's basically Kristaps Porzingis right now with what he's been able to contribute. The questions that obviously persist going forward is this a sustainable thing when Jonathan Isaac comes back? Chuma Okeke just made his return the other night and didn't play all that much, but his minutes figured to ramp up. Franz Wagner has been very impressive for them, and I think he solidified a front court spot going forward. The Bamba has undoubtedly been the most impressive of all of these guys. Adam, is Bamba in for a top 50 season the rest of the way? Do you think that he holds on to this role no matter what?
I think he holds on to the role. I think the minutes come down a little bit. I think they would prefer to have him under 30 if possible. Yeah. Just given his injury history, that sort of thing. But I think he could play 27, 28 per game. And so if that happens, obviously some of his numbers come down, but I think the blocks are sustainable and could go up or won't necessarily come down, but could potentially go up, because we often see players like Robert Williams and Mitch Robinson a few years ago. It's almost as if the fewer the minutes they play, the higher their block rate is. So he could very comfortably be at 2 blocks per game. Maybe 12 points, 9 or 10 rebounds. He's hitting those threes. Listening to the commentary on the game yesterday, they almost view him as potentially their best 3-point option in terms of his efficiency.
Yeah. There's not a lot of shooters on that team.
No, there's not. So, look, I think his role is sustainable. Top 50 is probably sort of his ceiling, I think. Mm-hmm. But as we saw with Robert Williams last year, blocks are just so important in terms of fantasy value. So he could be a top 50 player. I'd probably have him a little bit lower than that, because his percentages aren't as good as someone like a Robert Williams, because he does shoot threes. But look, I've got him in a lot of spots as well, so I'm hoping both he and Miles Bridges can keep going.
Adam's having a great fantasy season so far, everyone. If he's not made it clear on the show,
I'm going okay. As I said, I do have Michael Porter as well, and I have Clint Capella as well. So he's another guy that's sort of struggled a little bit. So, I don't know. What do you think about Bamba? Are you sort of the same opinion there?
I am. The only area that I'd be concerned is, again, just this particular minutes total, like you mentioned, just the injury history. And again, there will just be a general front court squeeze. But I mean, I think that the observation on the Magic broadcast is astute. His floor spacing is kind of too important to take him out of the game. He offered that has always been one of the most reliable elements of Bamba's game was the shot. His inability to get on the floor in the past with Clifford was always defensive based. It was always that they didn't. He just poor positioning or just poor awareness on that end of the floor, and I think that he's definitely upped it up a notch. He's also. I'm not a big believer of playing for contracts, but Bamba is one of those situations too where he's almost entire start of his NBA career was nondescript. He was barely out there, and now this is his first real opportunity to play. Yeah, I think that there's some contract year elements to what he's doing too. I mean, I think that he's going to, upping his focus a little bit and just his aggressiveness on both ends of the floor. Wendell Carter Jr. got paid and he didn't, so he still needs to get that first rookie contract. I would say conservatively, I would bet that he probably finishes at this rate. Maybe top 75 is closer to where I'd peg him. Top 50 might be on the high end of things because that those percentages will probably take a step down, and maybe he gets closer to 1.7 blocks or 1.6. Maybe that's team too low, but I don't know. I think that he has solidified his role for this team going forward for this year. There's the fact that he and Wendell Carter can play next to each other eliminates really any concern that he's going to fall out of the rotation. So, yeah, I think people who drafted Bamba should be pretty pleased, even if this might be a little on the high end or at the ceiling for what he is capable of this season. Let's talk about another underperforming guy, Colin Sexton. Now, here's someone who, Colin Sexton's never had the most full 9-category, league game, but this year he's been noticeably muted. He's been less involved in the offense. There seems to be less of an emphasis about really just him in this as part of Cleveland's future. Now, Cleveland's played great, relatively speaking. They've exceeded expectations. Evan Mobley's been incredible. Darius Garland and Ricky Rubio have played a lot of these minutes at the guard spots, and it just seems that shots are flowing around in different directions that aren't Sexton's this season. 17.3 points per game, 1-3, 1.9 assists, and 3.1 turnovers per game. Those numbers are all the turnovers are high, or I think higher than they used to be, but all the scoring stuff is lower. The efficiency isn't that much of an issue for him either. It's more of a usage thing. I mean, the free throw stuff is a lot lower than it has been in the past, but the field goal percentage is still near 47, 50 range, which is on the high end for guards and has always been one of Sexton's strong suits. I'm a little I was low on Sexton coming into the season. I had him as a draft bust in one of the videos that we did on the channel. I wasn't expecting this low of a performance to start the year, though. I mean, outside the top 200 is pretty out there for a guy who still averages as many points per game as Sexton. Do you think that the step back in the offense is real? Because I kind of think it is.
Yeah, I think to some degree it is. I wasn't super high on him either. I don't have him anywhere. I think the scoring will come up. I think probably closer to 20. His free throw percentage is way down. I was just looking at his numbers here. He's at 71% at the moment from the line. That'll come up over 80.
He's a mid-80s guy, really.
Yeah. So that'll bump his scoring up a little bit. Triples, 3-pointers, they'll come up slightly. He's not a big 3-point shooter, but I think they come up closer to 1.5. But the other numbers, I mean, I don't think we're not expecting a lot of assists. No. Turnovers will hopefully come down a little bit. But for me, I mean, it's two things. I think they've got more scoring on the floor than they have had previously. So they just don't need him to do as much. They've got Markkanen there who can score the ball. Mobley has been surprisingly good on offense as well, so gives them another option. Jared Allen is always refining his offensive game. You still wouldn't call him an offensive-minded center, but he's looking better. Garland is just going to get more confident, and I don't know how confident the team are in Sexton and whether they view him as part of their long-term future. I don't know. So, look, for me, I think he does get better than this, but top 100 is probably his ceiling. I don't think he's much better than top 100, and could easily be top sort of 130.
Yeah, I agree. I think that last year was the best version of him that we saw, and he wasn't top 100 then either. I never understood why people were taking him in the 70s range. You had to assume jumps in his game that he just simply he just simply has never shown a capacity for, like a jump in like assists, being more of a playmaker. I mean, Sexton's never been that kind of guy. He's a pure shooting guard for all intents and purposes in the NBA. And there is an element where Cleveland has indicated on many fronts that they are pivoting away from him being the engine of their offense. I mean, there's been a ton of talk about Darius Garland being that star in Cleveland, that they want to build the team around him and Mobley. Mobley and Markkanen's presence in that lineup is a big deal. I mean, like Isaac Okoro was a zero on offense last season, and now he's coming off the bench behind Sexton. It seems that the team was far more geared toward his style of play last year, and they've pivoted away from that quite a bit. And for a guy who relied so much on usage and shots for the fantasy value that he had previously, which wasn't a whole ton, going down in any capacity it's kind of a death nail for him in 9 category leagues. Like he definitely, I don't think that we see points will come back up, but I think that his current role in the offense is, especially while Cleveland is winning, I mean, it seems like a sign of things to come for him. So I think that outside the top 100, maybe even 150 range, it is quite possible the rest of the way.
Yeah. I think so.
Next guy on the list, Tyler Hero, one of the preseason stars that we mentioned in our first episode. That has translated into this NBA season. He is going crazy from the scoring department. He's currently ranked number 64 in 9 cat leagues with averages of 22 points per game, 2.8 threes, 6.7 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. What do you make of this? Because I look at these numbers, and a lot of it is actually, Hero has always been a guy who you would expect to be a good scorer, rebounder, and passer. Like, those have always been elements of his fantasy game that have been the strengths. But what I'm so interested in about this start to the year is that his weaknesses are still very much there. He is averaging no defensive stats at all, like 0.2 steals and 0 blocks. That's still a nothing element to his game. The 45% shooting from the floor is average on a relatively high volume of attempts. He's taking about 17.8 shots per game, and I feel like that's going to be on the high end for him. I'm not trying to take anything away, but it seems that to me, when I look at this stat line from Hero, I feel like this is unsustainable. That's my first impression. What do you feel?
Yeah, look, I think it is as well. The percentages are fine. Like, I think it's more just the usage comes down slightly. 18 shots a game is a lot for a guy coming off the bench, even for someone like a Jordan Clarkson, who basically has a green light when he comes off the bench. So I think the usage comes down slightly. The rebounds, I think, are relatively real. He has always had that ability to get decent rebound numbers from the guard position. So this is probably about as good as it gets for Hero. I think if you wanted to trade him and get a top 70 guy back, that would be fine. But I mean, he could realistically end inside the top 100 quite easily. And given he was being drafted, I don't know, lower than that, I think I didn't get him anywhere, but I have a feeling he was going outside the top 100. So yeah, look, I think he'll return value. Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say. Like, I think they need his scoring. Kyle Lowry doesn't look great on offense. I think they need him on the floor, but they do need scoring off the bench there. So yeah, look, I think this is probably a bit high, but top 80 is probably okay. Top 80, top 90.
Well, let's talk about Lowry, because he's actually the next guy on our list here as in the disappointments category. And I have a feeling that there's an element of these two taking away from each other, because Lowry's been very ineffective with his shot to start the season. I mean, he's been fine as their point guard, still averaging about 7.2 assists per game, but only 8.4 points on 33% shooting from the floor, only 9 shot attempts, which is I haven't looked at the season numbers for Lowry, but that's about as low as it's been, uh, maybe close to a decade for Kyle Lowry. It's a low on the low end of things. He's currently ranked outside the top 113 in 9 category leagues, which isn't terrible, but still productive. But this is a guy who is getting drafted in the 50s range. Do you think that at a certain point, if Lowry's shots start coming around and he becomes more efficient, does that take away from Tyler Hero directly?
I think it probably does a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there will be a bit of a correlation there. So, but yeah, I mean, they're still going to, they're not always on the floor together. So it isn't a direct correlation. It's not like Hero is starting alongside Lowry and one gets more shots, one gets less. So I think there is a bit there. But yeah, look, Lowry will be better than this. He's going to score more than 8 points a game. I think we can safely say that he'll be up, I don't know, 12, 13 at minimum. And look, they need him on the floor. I think the bigger impact that I've seen anyway has been on Bam's assist numbers, which have come down quite a lot, which we projected in the preseason that was going to happen. So Lowry would be better than this if he could be a guard that you could throw out I don't know, someone like a Harrison Barnes, throw him out and get Kyle Lowry. I think you'd be getting value back there. So he'll be better. Yeah, he'll be better than this.
Well, we had a couple more guys that we were going to touch on, but we're running on the lower end on the time side. We want to get to some questions for the live Q&A. We're gonna figure these segments out at some point. Get these, but there's always a lot to talk about. Can't blame us for the passion in these trends. So yeah, y'all got some fantasy questions. Go ahead and start dropping them in the chat if you haven't already. We're gonna move on to some of the ones that we already have down there in this chat room. We're gonna start with our good buddy Al, asking, first of all, hello to you, Al. Terry Rozier probable today. I need some guidance on who to drop: Nick Batum or Devin Vassell. Also, is Larry Nance worth a pickup? So let's start with the first question. You got to plug Terry Rozier back into your lineup. Batum or Vassell? Well, I'll say this. I like Vassell from a real-life perspective. I think that he's a very interesting player for that young Spurs team, and I feel like he's going to have a role that will grow as the year goes on. He has a bit of an outsized one right now because Doug McDermott is out of the lineup, which hasn't led to a jump in production that many people may have hoped, but has had more minutes. Batum's a very boring player, but his role, I think, is more solidified in the short term than Vassell's is. It depends on how your team is built and set up, and if you can afford to wait for Vassell to continue taking strides in that rotation. I'd like to hold on to him, but I think Batum is the safer fantasy option right now. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I think, it depends where you are, as you said, in your team build, that sort of thing. I think Batum is safer, but Vassell has more upside. Like, Batum has zero upside. He's not going to all of a sudden come out and be this top 50 player.
Yeah.
We know exactly who he is. So if you're in a good position and your roster's pretty strong, then I would drop Batum just because I think you can get his stats off the waiver wire pretty easy.
You get Batum himself off the waiver wire.
Well, you can get Batum, yeah, that's right. Someone else might pick him up, but then he'll be dropped in a week. So I would lean Batum if you can, as you said, if you can play the waiting game with Vassell, because he is pretty up and down. He wasn't good yesterday, but he has had some good games.
Yeah.
And then the second part of that question on the Larry Nance part, is he a pickup? Yeah.
We know the story with him. We know what he can do. The fit in Portland has not been seamless so far, though.
No. I've dropped him in a couple of leagues, and he's still sitting on waivers. So if that sort of gives you an indication that he's probably going to be available in a week, because he's not a hot target at the moment. But as you said, we know what he can do. So it's a tough one, but again, he's more of a stash sort of guy. Throw him on your bench and just see what happens over the next week or two, and maybe he finds his footing a little bit. But he's getting under 20 minutes a game, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, he hasn't broken over 20 minutes an hour.
No. So I don't know. I wouldn't say you would have to run out and grab him. But if you're sitting nicely and you've got a strong roster, then you could just pick him up and see what happens.
Next question, Michael asks, what are your thoughts on Derek's White starts to the season? Do you think he will improve? Well, he's actually been pretty good. Adam, you can tell me where his ranking's at. But last I checked, I thought he was in the top 50, 60 range in 9-cat leagues.
He might be. Let me have a look.
He
probably is. I know he's been good.
Yeah. Really so here's the thing with Derek
70.
White.
Okay, so
70
he's
range.
a little bit lower than I thought.
And usually with him, it's always about efficiency issues. Like he'll have a lot of games where he just can't buy a bucket at all, and that's just kind of been a consistent trend with him. Where his value really comes is in those counting stats. He's a good a nice trickle of assists and okay rebounder for the guard spot. The steals and blocks numbers are really where he makes his money, though, and he's been really solid in both respects this year. The fact that he's healthy is a positive. He could not string together 10 games in a row without getting hurt or getting COVID last year. And that really limited, I think what was still a pretty decent season on the whole for him. But yeah, I mean, he's a hard player to, have a stable projection for because the efficiency can dictate how good he is from a week to week basis. But I've liked what I've seen from him. I feel confident. I feel pretty good about the spots that I have him, which are a few. I think that he's going to return value this year, maybe not substantially, but people who drafted him in the 70s range, I think you're going to be fine, or the 60s range, you're going to get a guy who will be in that 60s, 50s range in 9-cat leagues by year end, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. He's 72nd now, and I think that's probably his floor. I think he, as we said, he barely played last year, so he is still just sort of getting used to being out on the floor for more than 4 games in a row. And yeah, look, I think he's only hitting 1.73s at the moment. I think that'll come up over 2. And everything else is sustainable. We know what he does. Percentages are a bit up and down, but I'd be pretty comfortable with probably where you drafted him. Was probably around 70, I would think. So he's right on where he needs to be, and I think there's room for growth.
Next question from Lay. I'm going to say Lay. Correct me if I'm wrong. 9-cat head-to-head 14 teams. Would you rather have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Desmond Bane or De'Aaron Fox and Miles Bridges, 2 guys that we talked about in this video? Probably a punt free throw team since I have Ben Simmons and Clint Capella. So Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Desmond Bane versus De'Aaron Fox and Miles Bridges. And if you're punting free throws, Fox undoubtedly becomes a far more valuable player to you. I mean, that Bridges he's been across the board terrific this year, but free throw percentage is a strength of his. But I don't know. I think Fox and Bridges has the higher upside by a good amount. Particularly, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a tough player to project. I think he's like 95 on the season so far. He's still not able to get many defensive stats going. And Desmond Bane, who's been great so far, I have some concerns about where his role is once Dylan Brooks comes back into the fold. He's just going to take minutes and shots away from him. For Bane, who his fantasy value is so dependent on scoring numbers, you take usage away and he could fall in the ranks pretty quickly. So I'm pretty confidently leaning in the Fox Bridges direction, assuming that Fox takes that step back forward and that, as we talked about with Bridges, probably still looking at a top 50-40 season on the year. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think it's a fair trade.
I do too.
I'd probably lean Fox Bridges as well, just for reasons you touched on. I think this is probably where Bane ends. Not ends in terms of his season is done or anything, but I don't think he can get any better than where he is now.
Yeah.
Because as much as I would like him to be shooting over Dylan Brooks, I don't think it's going to happen. And Shai, as you said, he can be really good, but there is always that worry that the Thunder, any injury, he's out. Like they're trash. They're not going to push him at all. Where I think the Kings will probably be trying to push to make the playoffs.
Definitely the Hornets too.
And the Hornets as well. So I think both those guys are going to get plenty of minutes. Bridges, as we said, he probably regresses a little bit, but Fox has upside to be a top 70 player. Whereas, I don't I don't think Bain can get any better than about the top 90, which is probably where he is now, something
He's
like
actually
that.
top 40 right now,
Oh, he's top
surprisingly.
40. Okay,
It's great.
well,
I mean, he's
he's
like
not
actually,
staying top 40.
yeah. Like I think Bain's the ultimate sell high candidate of these guys in this group, and Fox is a really solid buy low.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just like I mean, you have a couple. I mean, Shea's kind of a buy low as well. To be fair, and Bridges is a bit of a sell high, but in the end, I'm just to say in a vacuum, which of these two are just going to finish combined higher rankings in 9-cat leagues? I just feel like it's Fox and Bridges. Martin, he asks, 8 teams, 9-cat rosters with 16 deep each. So I guess that evens out to about standard league amount of players. Are
Pretty much,
Şengün
yeah.
and Giddy worth the 15th and 16th roster spots, or should I stream those spots? Well, I'll start by saying this: you don't need to worry about streaming at all at this juncture of the season. It doesn't really matter how, unless you're like half your roster is just dead in the water, just not playing. I'm far more interested in stashing guys with upside, and I feel like Şengün and Giddy are both. They can both contribute in a format like that while having upside for later in the year. Maybe more Şengün than Giddy because I don't trust Oklahoma City as far as I could. I don't know. As far as like is anything, I don't know. I don't have a good analogy to express my distrust for that organization playing their guys down the stretch, but it's not. It's bad. That being said, I think it's fine. Hold on to those one or both of those guys in my mind. Don't worry about streaming. It really just more important to have a guy to know who your cuttable guys are, so you can go for a hot free agent with upside.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I'd have both of them on a 12-team roster. We've seen Şengün, his roles bit up and down, but the Rockets are bad as well. So even though they're not sort of actively getting him out there a ton at the moment, he's falling into 18, 20 minutes a game because they're often down by 30 points in the last quarter. So they're putting him out in garbage time. So he's been, I mean, he hasn't been setting the world on fire, but he's been solid enough. So yeah, I'd have both of those on the back end of a bench.
Jim asks 9-cat head-to-head punting, turnovers, and field goal percentage. Kevin Porter Jr. or Josh Giddey. Porter Jr. was a guy that we might have touched on in our video on sustainable versus unsustainable things, and KPJ has been disappointing people from pretty much every respect. I mean, I didn't draft him anywhere because I was so afraid of the percentages and turnovers, but he's not even giving you the points and assists right now that people thought he might have been, getting towards. He's outside the top 250, I think, on the season. With that being said, you are punting the categories of his that are kind of the write-offs as is. And I would anticipate that he's averaging about 12.5 points and 5 assists per game. I would feel comfortable in saying that those are going to go up. Like I feel like that's one of those regression to the means things where Porter Jr. is on the low end of what he's capable of. Even if he's really struggling adjusting to being an NBA point guard with teams honing in on the Rockets, trying to get those easy wins to start the year. Like he's not getting any favors right now. What do you feel like, Adam? I think I'm leaning Kevin Porter here.
Yeah, look, probably in that punt build, I would slightly lean Kevin Porter. If it was a no punt, it would be Giddey. But I think Kevin Porter will get you more points. Obviously, then Giddey's not going to be a huge scorer this year. So probably slightly Kevin Porter if you're punting, field goal, and turnovers, because they're his two worst categories. But I think they'd actually be pretty close in that punt build. I think either of them would be a solid option, but maybe just Kevin Porter Jr. slightly.
Going back to Michael here, he asks about Al Horford. Is his production sustainable? What is his rest of season outlook? And then he has another question about Jaren Jackson on whether or not he can get better. But let's focus on Horford. He's number 6 in 9-cat leagues right now. So the answer is very clearly no. That's not sustainable. Al Horford is not going to be a top 6 player this year, but he's going to be good the rest of the season. I have very little doubt about that. I have him in tons of spots. He is going to, I think, finish. I don't think top 50 is out of the question. I don't think he's proven that he is a rather stable fixture for them. I think his block rate is like insane right now. Like I think he's averaging
like 3.5 blocks.
He's averaging 3.5 blocks per game. You can get that. No, that's not happening. He's probably going to average half of that, which is still a really high number. I mean, I didn't look through all the stuff, but there's clearly, I think Boston's played a couple of overtime games. I think that Horford's just benefited from a lot of high minutes and just abnormally large block numbers. But this is a guy that people slept on because of the Oklahoma City disappointing year and the weird fit in Philadelphia. He's healthy. He looks as fresh as he has in years. And he's a pretty important part of what Boston wants to do. So I feel comfortable saying that he's going to be a draft day steal and probably a top 50, 40 player the rest of the way.
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, Horford, that's not sustainable. I had to check when you said he was the 6th ranked player. So, no, not sustainable. But rest of season, look, top 50, best case. Probably his floor would be top 80, top 90, just because he does so many things for them. They need him out there. Jaren Jackson will get better, yes. I'm pretty confident. He's 80th or something now. I think he's a top 50 player as well. Once he gets going, you have to remember he didn't play last year, basically. Yeah. So he's also getting used to just getting out there on a nightly basis and playing with different players. They've got Steven Adams there now, who takes some adjustments getting used to playing with him as well. So, look, I'm no for Horford, yes for Jaren Jackson.
Yeah, I share those sentiments. And final question, and then we'll wrap it up here. One last one from Jim asking where we see Melton and Bane finishing on the year. And that's kind of a tough one because Dylan Brooks is going to come back and he is going to impact both of those guys significantly just in terms of like cutting into their minutes and shots. And just by virtue of that, it's kind of hard to – because Bane and Melton have been great for this Grizzlies team. And there's an argument to be made that they deserve more minutes and shots than Dylan Brooks. I know that Brooks is a good defender, and they like what he brings to the aggressiveness that he brings to the end of the floor, even if the shots can be kind of weird and bad at times. But just by assuming that both are just going to take a usage hit, Melton is the better game sustained for that, because he can help with assists and boards and defensive stats, whereas Bane, again, he's really just a points and threes and good percentages kind of guy. So I can't be like, I can only kind of like work in like ranges of like 50s or so. I think that Melton's a top 100 player this season. I feel pretty good that he's going to hold on to a role large enough to get to that point. I think that Bane will be, when it's all said and done, I might be lower on him, but I feel like he's going to be fringy, top 100, maybe top 120-ish area when it's all said and done, which is productive. But these two are both top, I think they're neck and neck in 9-cat rankings right now in that top 40, 45 range. Melton, I think, has the easier case to stay closer to that mark. I'm not saying that he'll hit that mark specifically, but I think that he's got the better outlook of those two.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think there's a lot of variables here, so we need to wait until Brooks is back to know exactly. But as you said, Melton doesn't rely on usage as much, so he'll be able to maintain his value a little bit easier. It's really going to come down to whether Taylor Jenkins has faith in Melton now, because we've seen before that he'll have these really good games and then he just doesn't play. So it is tricky to project. I think best case Melton's it could be a top 60 player if the minutes stick high enough just because of his defense alone. But conservatively sort of top 80, top 90. Bane, top 100, top 110, as you said. And I think it will change nightly as well. I think Bane probably starts next to Brooks and Melton comes off the bench. But Bane brings you the offense, Melton brings defense. So it will depend a little bit on the matchup and how the game's going and that sort of thing. So, but look, both standard league guys, but Melton I probably think is the safer, assuming he has earned the trust of Taylor Jenkins.
I would agree. And that remains to be seen. I'm not sure when Brooks is set to come back, but the battle between Taylor Jenkins and D'Anthony Melton's minutes is one of the hotly contested battles in the NBA. I mean, we'll know at some point. But that's our show for the week, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in. If you liked what we had to say, if you didn't like it, let us know in the comments. Drop a like on this video. Subscribe to the Hoopball YouTube channel. We will be back next Sunday with another show ripe with commentary. I'm sure we will bring up DeAnthony Melton and Desmond Bain again. I think we're on a 4-for-4 streak with those two specifically. But why not? Those two are fun to talk about, as is just NBA fantasy basketball hoops conversations. It's great. Adam, hope you have a great rest of your week, my man. We will touch base again next time. See you, everyone.
No worries, man. Talk to you then.